So, you want to know what it was really like to be a medieval soldier. Not the movie version, not the shining armor, slow-motion sword fights, or noble speeches delivered with perfect hair and a soft orchestral swell. No, you came here for the truth, and unfortunately for you, I'm willing to give it. Welcome to the Grumpy Historian, where we dig through the rotting trenches of the past so you don't have to. And tonight, we're marching straight into one of the worst jobs in human history, being a soldier in the Middle Ages. And before you get any ideas, no, it wasn't glorious, it wasn't romantic, it was mud, blood, fire, fleas, and the vague, ever-present scent of someone else's digestive disaster wafting through your helmet. There was no hero's welcome waiting for you, just blisters, dysentery, and maybe, if you were lucky, a sword through the face. So get cozy, lay back, pull the blanket up to your chin, because things are about to get profoundly uncomfortable. But don't worry, my voice will be your lullaby, because the more horrifying the story, the faster you tend to fall asleep. Funny how that works. And if you happen to be watching this from the 21st century, or whatever cursed timeline you call home, go ahead and subscribe, unless you prefer your history sugar-coated. In which case, there's the door. Still here. Good. Let's ruin your night. Right then, you've tucked yourself in. You're warm. You're calm. You're ready to drift off to sleep. So let's talk about how you got recruited to die in a field with mud in your teeth and a pig bladder for a helmet. Now, forget the movies where brave young men march off to war, waving at their tearful mothers with a noble gleam in their eyes. That's adorable. That's not what happened. If you were a medieval peasant, which you were, statistically, you didn't sign up for anything. You were told, maybe with a politely worded summons from your local lord, or maybe with a boot to the ribs and a congratulations you're in the army now speech that lasted 4 syllables. Either way, no one asked if you were free next week. See, wars had a season back then, like tomatoes or the flu. Campaign season, as they called it, usually started after the spring planting. Lords didn't want to lose their workforce before the wheat was in the ground. Priorities. So once the crops were secured and the fields were ready to ignore for a few months, your noble overlord would round up the local men and start planning whatever ill-fated siege or battlefield disaster he had in mind. It was like medieval HR, only with fewer benefits and more arrows. Now, there wasn't a recruitment poster. There was no dramatic music. There was just a guy on horseback who smelled like leather, sweat, and barely suppressed rage. And he had a list. If your name was on it, congratulations. You were about to become part of history. The bloody miserable part. And don't get too excited about training. We'll get to that disaster later. For now, just understand, you weren't chosen because you were brave, or strong, or talented with a sword. You were chosen because you had a pulse, and 2 vaguely functional limbs. 3 if they were feeling picky. Some men tried to run. You could do that. You could pack up your things and disappear into the woods. Maybe change your name. Maybe pretend to be a monk. But if they caught you, and they would catch you, well, let's just say you'd be heading to war with fewer fingers than you started with, or possibly your head on a spike, which really cuts down on your battlefield effectiveness. But let's say you didn't run, or you couldn't, or you had that pesky thing called honor that people keep pretending exists. So now you're standing in the muddy village square, wearing the same shirt you've worn for 2 months straight, and you're told to bring your own gear. That's right, you were responsible for your weapons, food, and sometimes even your horse, like a camping trip. If the goal of camping was to commit murder and possibly lose a foot to gangrene. And because there were no army-issued rations or kits, people brought whatever they had: pitchforks, hunting knives, axes meant for firewood. If you were lucky, your village had a blacksmith. If not, well, you were basically just a man with a sharp stick, hoping the other guy was slightly less sharp or slightly more tired. But the best part, some of you brought your families. No, seriously, The Crusades were like a medieval road trip. People dragged along wives, children, elderly parents, because nothing screams wholesome family adventure like marching across continents to slaughter strangers in God's name. Women sometimes followed their husbands into war because staying behind meant starvation, or worse. And children. Children came too, because what else were they going to do? Stay home and pay taxes. Entire caravans of non-combatants would trail behind the army like an entourage of terrified support staff. They'd cook, clean, bury the dead, sometimes become the dead, and occasionally even pick up a weapon when things went truly sideways, which they often did. You might be thinking, well, at least there was some sense of loyalty, and sure there was. Loyalty to your Lord, mostly because he owned you. Loyalty to your comrades, because misery loves company. But the state? The nation? No, that wasn't a thing yet. You weren't fighting for a flag. You were fighting because your landlord told you to. And if you didn't, he might burn down your house. Or worse, raise your rent. And let's not forget the church, because nothing completes a military draft like the looming threat of eternal damnation. Refuse to fight, and you weren't just disobeying your Lord, you were disobeying God, or at least the guys who said they spoke for him. So now you're not just scared of dying, you're scared of dying wrong. In summary, you were called, not chosen. You brought your own gear, your own food, maybe your wife and kids. You weren't trained, you weren't ready, and in about 2 days' time, you'd be soaked in blood, deaf in one ear, and possibly missing several teeth. But sure, glory. So as you lie there, warm and clean in your little modern bed, maybe sipping tea, maybe scrolling through your phone, take a moment to be grateful that no one just knocked on your door, handed you a spear, and told you to start walking east. Because in the Middle Ages, that wasn't just possible. That was a regular Tuesday. Now close your eyes. Breathe. You've survived medieval recruitment. Sleep, if you can. We march at dawn. Ah yes, training. The heroic training montage. You know the one. Inspirational music, slow-motion sword twirls, an old grizzled mentor, yelling things like again, while you slowly become a flawless killing machine. That didn't happen. Not in the Middle Ages. If you were expecting a medieval boot camp, sorry to disappoint. The average soldier's training consisted of being yelled at, handed a sharpened stick, and pushed in the direction of someone who also didn't know what they were doing. It's not that they didn't want to prepare, they just didn't have the time, or the resources, or any real idea what preparation should involve. Warfare was mostly instinctual. You stabbed, you blocked, you tried not to trip over a corpse, and if you survived long enough to get the hang of it, congratulations, you were now the village expert. Now, let's say you were lucky. Let's say you were born a noble, with a title and land, and at least one parent who thought war might be your future. You had slightly more options. You'd probably learn how to ride a horse. You might get a sword, and you'd definitely be forced to participate in that medieval version of gym class called tournaments. Tournaments were like real battles, except somehow worse. Picture 24 overconfident young men, each in 70 pounds of metal, galloping directly at one another on horses that did not sign up for this. The goal? Hit the other guy with a lance until he falls off, or dies, or both. They called it jousting. I call it medieval speed dating with a high fatality rate, because here's the dirty little secret. People died in these games all the time. Take Duke Leopold V of Austria. Important man, wealthy, powerful. In 1194, he took a lance to the guts during a tournament and died, just like that. No battle, no glory, just one big oops in front of a crowd. All that nobility, all that armor, and he still went down like a sack of wet bread. So yes, if you were nobility, you might have had more opportunities to get hurt before the real fighting even started. But actual combat instruction? Let's not get carried away. For peasants, you know, the 90% of the army, training was more like life experience. If you hunted deer, you knew how to aim a bow. If you chopped wood, you understood how to swing an axe. If you'd ever butchered a pig, well, you were disturbingly well prepared for hand-to-hand combat. They learned to kill the way they learned to farm, badly, and through injury. The logic was simple. Why waste time training a man who might die tomorrow anyway? It was far more efficient to hand you a spear, point toward the enemy, and let Darwin sort it out. If you lived, you probably learned something. If you didn't, well, the guy behind you was watching. Maybe he took notes. In some cases there were field drills, sort of. When armies mustered, they might line up for some basic formations. This mostly involved standing still while someone shouted things at you in Latin. And if you were really lucky, you might practice marching, which is a nice skill to have, right up until the first arrow hits your neighbor and you forget how legs work. There were no manuals, no safety briefings, no bright orange cones. The first time most men experienced real combat was in combat. Let that sink in. The first time you raise a shield, it's to stop a real sword. The first time you duck, it's because an axe is heading for your collarbone. And the first time you realize you're holding your weapon wrong is also the last. But don't worry, your commander might be worse. Medieval leadership was a mixed bag. Some lords were seasoned veterans, others were just wealthy buffoons playing war because they were bored. Either way, they weren't standing next to you in the meat grinder. They'd be on horseback, shouting vague instructions you couldn't hear over the screaming. Even archery wasn't as precise as people imagine. Yes, the English longbowmen were terrifying. Yes, they had range, but learning to shoot accurately took years. Most archers trained from childhood, not for war, but because that's what poor rural kids did to survive. And even then, arrows went everywhere, including the backs of their own men. So, no heroic sparring, no choreographed swordplay, no old masters correcting your stance, just you, a weapon, a prayer, and an overwhelming sense that this may have been a mistake. And if you thought this might all build camaraderie, sure, you and your fellow conscripts bonded over how little you all knew, over how quickly your arms tired, over how no one was sure if that noise in the distance was thunder or hooves. But look at the bright side. You didn't have to worry about performance anxiety. No one expected you to survive. So now, while you lie in your warm little bed, try to imagine stepping onto a battlefield with no clue what you're doing, surrounded by terrified men who also have no clue what they're doing, and all of you are swinging sharpened metal objects in hopes that someone else dies first. It's enough to make you feel grateful for your pillow. Now close your eyes. Breathe slowly. You've survived medieval training, which, let's be honest, was mostly about not dying before the battle started. Sleep well, or don't. We haven't even gotten to the stabbing yet. Time to suit up. You've been recruited, you've received exactly 0 training, and now it's time to get dressed for what is almost certainly your last day on Earth. Try not to get anything muddy. Oh wait, too late, everything's already muddy. Now let's set one thing straight. There was no uniform, no tidy row of matching gear laid out like some medieval version of a military fashion show. What you wore into battle depended on 2 things: how much money you had and how much your local lord felt like spending. Spoiler, neither of those worked in your favor. If you were rich, and I mean really rich, not owns 2 goats rich, then congratulations. You might get full plate armor, heavy, finely crafted, and so expensive it could cost more than most people's homes. These were custom-made metal suits, each joint engineered to let you move just enough to stab someone without immediately falling over. You looked like a walking furnace, and you were, because full plate armor, under the sun, turned you into a slow-roasting meat pie with legs. But let's be honest, you're not rich, you're poor, peasant poor, and you're going to war with whatever you didn't sell at the market last week. That means your armor might be a padded gambeson, essentially a thick jacket stuffed with fabric, straw, or animal hair. Stylish? No. Comfortable? Also no. Effective, debatable. It might absorb a glancing blow, but more often, it just slowed the bleeding. If you were lucky, and I use that word loosely, you might have a leather vest or a rusty chainmail shirt handed down through 5 generations and about 24 unwashed torsos. It smells like goats and old soup, and some of the rings are missing. But hey, it's better than nothing. Barely. And don't even ask about pants. The lower half of your body was considered optional by many armies. Most protection stopped at the knees. If you were particularly fortunate, someone might toss you a set of greaves, shin guards made of metal or hardened leather. If not, well, best of luck keeping your femoral artery intact when someone swings an axe at your thighs. Now, let's talk helmets. Yes, you got one. Eventually. It might be conical, like a cereal bowl hammered into shape, or it might be a full-face helm with a narrow slit for your eyes, and even less for your nose. That sounds good in theory, right up until the heat sets in and the stench of your own breath starts cooking against your face. Helmet vision was terrible. You could barely see. Your peripheral vision, gone. Your hearing, muffled. Your situational awareness, zero. You were essentially a blind, deaf can of soup, lurching across a battlefield full of people trying to open you. And when someone did hit your helmet, the sound would echo inside your skull, like a bell tolling for your soul. You'd be lucky to stay upright, even luckier to remember your name. Let's not forget the little accessories. A belt for your sword, assuming you had one, which you didn't. A pouch for food you wouldn't eat. Maybe a water skin, which would either be half full or long gone by the time battle actually started. You might have a dagger, you might have a broken dagger, or a stick, and shoes. Don't expect boots that fit. Most soldiers wore simple leather shoes or sandals with minimal padding. After 2 days of marching, your feet were blistered lumps. After 2 hours of battle, you'd be lucky to still have them. And the worst part? No one washed anything. Your armor was crusted in old blood. Your tunic reeked of mildew and fear. If your gear got wet, and it did, constantly, it stayed that way until it rotted or fused to your body. Lice came free with every helmet. Rats were your camp neighbors, and mold. Mold was your battle flag. So, now you're standing there, fully geared up if that's the word, smelling like a compost heap, breathing like Darth Vader through a soup can, squinting through a slit the width of a bread knife, trying to remember whether you strapped your dagger on the left or right. It doesn't matter. You'll drop it in 10 minutes anyway, but at least you look intimidating, right? Wrong. You look like a man wearing a pile of old junk, limping into battle with a nervous cough and someone else's pants. The knights might shine. You're going to rust before the fight even begins. Still, all things considered, it could be worse. You could be unarmed and unarmored. And don't worry, we'll get to those poor souls later. So now, cozy in your bed, maybe wrapped in a blanket, I want you to imagine getting dressed in gear that doesn't fit, made of materials that barely protect, surrounded by men who smell like cheese and despair. Imagine knowing that in a few hours, this outfit will be the only thing between you and a blade aimed at your neck, feeling sleepy yet. Good, because the next part gets louder. So, you've been recruited against your will. You've received no real training. You've been stuffed into gear that smells like damp poultry and regret. And now, it's the night before battle. Congratulations, you've made it to the worst slumber party in history. Picture it. You're huddled on a patch of damp ground. Your bed, no more than flattened grass, and half a blanket you're sharing with 2 other men. The sky is black, the stars are out, and somewhere in the distance, you hear the steady shifting of horses, the creak of leather saddles, and the occasional muffled prayer. And someone, always someone, is snoring, or sobbing, or both. You try to get comfortable, which is laughable, because your armor is still on, your gambeson is soaked with sweat, and the cold has settled into your bones like a permanent roommate. You smell onions, not because anyone's cooking, Don't be ridiculous, but because that's what fear smells like. Raw, unwashed bodies, bad breath, nervous digestion. It's an aromatic blend of desperation and yesterday's turnips. Now you might think this is a time of solemn reflection, maybe even bonding. And sure, there's a little of that. Men pray, they whisper quiet apologies to whatever gods might be listening. They clutch tokens from home, a ribbon, a ring, a carved bit of wood that probably means something. But mostly, they just sit there, quiet, fidgeting, trying not to think too hard, because when the sun comes up, so do the screams. Some men drink, the lucky ones still have a bit of ale left, though it's warm, flat, and tastes like a goat's foot. Still, it burns going down, and that's something. A few pass around the last scraps of food, dried meat, old bread, a chunk of questionable cheese that might actually be fighting back. You chew slowly, you pretend it helps. It doesn't. There's laughter too, the awkward kind, forced, fragile. Someone tells a joke about the captain's teeth. Someone else farts loudly enough to draw a chuckle. For a brief moment, there's levity, and then it's gone, swallowed by the night and the weight of what's coming. You lie back, you try to sleep, but sleep doesn't come. Instead, you think. Your mind fills with questions you'd rather not answer. What will it feel like when the sword hits? Will I be trampled? Will I scream? Will anyone remember my name? Will they even bother to bury me? You shift uncomfortably. Your joints ache. Your back is sore. The armor presses in all the wrong places. You close your eyes, but behind the lids you see the battlefield already. A blur of metal, mud, and chaos. Your stomach twists, not from hunger, but from knowing. Knowing that tomorrow you might die, and even worse, that you might live just long enough to watch someone else die first. And around you, hundreds of other men are having the same thoughts, the same fears, the same gnawing certainty that the sun will rise far too soon, and that every breath you take tonight could be your last peaceful one, if you can even call this peace. Now a few brave idiots are still trying to be noble. They say things like, "We fight for glory," or "We die with honor." You nod along, politely, but inside you're thinking what everyone else is thinking. I just want to go home. But there is no home. Not right now. There is only this field, this stench, this shallow sleep with one eye open, and the rhythmic clank of armor shifting every time someone adjusts, trying and failing to relax. The commanders sleep in tents, warm, dry, smug. You sleep with a rock under your spine and a cold draft sneaking up your leg. A few men walk the perimeter. Sentries, they're called. They pretend to be brave, but they're just as scared, listening for the sound of movement in the dark. A raid, an ambush, an early start to the slaughter. Every twig snap feels like doom, every owl like a bad omen. And then, finally, sometime near dawn, your body gives up. You don't fall asleep, you drift, eyes half closed, limbs half numb, heart beating like a war drum, mind looping through all the ways this could end. It's not restful, but it's something. And now, centuries later, you, yes you, modern listener, are lying in your warm bed, wrapped in clean blankets, surrounded by the quiet hum of electricity and peace. No swords, no lice, no one farting in your direction while praying to Saint whoever for a painless death. Breathe deeply, appreciate that, because in 14th century Europe, this moment, this night before battle, it was the last quiet moment many men ever had, the last time they saw the moon, the last time they felt the cold and weren't bleeding. So close your eyes, sink into that mattress like it's a bed of moss, because the sun is rising, and the real horror is just beginning. Sleep now, you'll need your strength. Here we are. It's morning. The mist hasn't lifted. Your boots are soaked again. Your mouth is dry. Your hands shaking. You haven't slept. Not really. But it doesn't matter, because now someone just yelled something in Old French, and apparently that was the cue. You're going into battle. Now, Let's clear something up immediately. There's no dramatic sprint, no slow motion hero moment, no epic war cry that echoes across the hills. What actually happens is this. A wall of anxious armor-clad men starts shuffling forward, hesitantly, like they're trying not to trip on their own feet. Because they are. The ground is wet, churned up by hundreds of boots and hooves. Slippery, uneven, coated in the kind of mud that's more body than soil. And that glorious cinematic charge you were promised. Yeah, it feels more like lining up for a riot at a discount cabbage sale. One awkward step at a time. And the noise. Good Lord, the noise. Not drums, not trumpets, not any of that elegant soundtrack nonsense. What you hear is the raw, undiluted sound of people, terrified people, shouting for no reason other than to drown out their own panic. Men are yelling things they don't even understand. You hear prayers, curses, promises, apologies. One guy is just making vowel sounds now, long drawn-out howls like he's trying to terrify the enemy or himself. And the guy next to you, he's crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just leaking, quiet tears, whimpering under his breath. His helmet's crooked, and he's got a ribbon tied around his wrist, probably from someone he'll never see again. You don't say anything, because if you do, you'll probably start crying too. Your heart is hammering against your chest so hard it feels like it might break free and sprint off without you. Your stomach is flipping like a pancake on fire. Your hands are gripping your weapon so tightly that your knuckles have turned a different color. You tell yourself you're brave. You lie to yourself. Everyone does. Then the first contact. Not a clash, not a cinematic clang, just a bump. A shoulder hits yours. A shield nudges your side. You stagger. You stumble. And suddenly you realize you are touching the enemy. He's right there. He smells like rust and onions. His eyes are wide. He swings. You duck. Maybe. It begins. And now, all that careful planning, gone. Formation, broken in seconds. Strategy, out the window. Orders. You can't hear them over the chaos. You're no longer part of an army. You're part of a pile. Everyone is just pushing. It's not elegant. It's not brave. It's desperate, confused, dirty. You press forward because the people behind you are shoving. And if you fall, you might not get back up. Falling here means death. Not necessarily from a blade, though that's certainly an option, but from being trampled, crushed, lost in a panic of feet and mud and screaming. The man to your left is coughing. The one on your right just dropped his spear. Someone further up slips and vanishes beneath the swarm like a stone into a swamp. You're stepping on something, or someone. You don't look down. You can't. Your breath grows shallow. Not from fear, that part's old news now, but from exhaustion. Holding up your shield for 5 straight minutes feels like lifting a wagon. Your sword arm aches, your legs are jelly, and you haven't even swung yet. Somewhere in the chaos, you hear a hoarse scream. Not a neigh, a scream, and then a crash. You flinch, but there's nowhere to go, no space. You are shoulder to shoulder with your comrades. You can smell their breath, their sweat, their fear. Every time someone moves, the whole group shifts like a sea of terrified meat. And still, you push. You don't even know where the enemy line is anymore. You can't see past the mass of bodies. You can't hear anything but metal and panic. Your world has shrunk to the 6 inches in front of your face, and whatever happens in that space decides whether you live or not. You try to swing your sword. There's no room, so you jab, awkwardly, like poking a pig through a fence. You don't know if you hit anything. You don't know if it matters. You feel something hit your shield, hard. It vibrates up your arm, rattling your teeth. Someone shoves into your back. Someone else grabs your shoulder. You flail, you shout, and now you're screaming too. Not to scare the enemy, not for honor. You're screaming because your body doesn't know what else to do. But somehow, you're still standing, still breathing, still gripping that weapon like it's the only thing tethering you to reality. And if you're thinking, this seems awful, congratulations, it was. This was the charge. Not a sprint, not a gallant rush, just a slog through hell, one terrified footstep at a time. So now, lying there in your soft bed, take a deep breath. Listen to the quiet. Appreciate that no one is shoving you from behind, that your vision isn't blocked by a dented helmet, that your feet aren't stuck in corpse-flavored mud. Close your eyes. Rest. You survived the first push, but you're not safe yet. The real madness is just getting started. Here it comes. The first hit. You've been creeping forward in the shove fest called a charge, pressed so tightly against the men beside you, you've forgotten what personal space ever felt like. And now, you're there. The enemy is inches away, and you don't get to think. You barely get to see. Because the moment it starts, it starts. No signal, no ceremony, just a flash of motion, and bang, a shield slams into yours, and your whole body rattles. Your shoulder jars back like it's been kicked by a mule in chainmail. You don't know if you were hit, blocked, or if you just ran into someone harder than you. It doesn't matter. You're in it now. Your ears ring, not from some dramatic explosion, just from steel, wood, bone, all slamming together in a glorious medieval cacophony. And then, crack. You don't even know where it came from. Maybe someone's arm, maybe their jaw, maybe yours. There's no room to swing your sword properly, so everyone's flailing. You see a blur of motion to your left, then a sharp thunk as a weapon hits a helmet and slides off. Someone screams, not one of those heroic war cries, but a high-pitched panicked shriek, like a child realizing too late that this was a bad idea. You smell blood, not in the poetic sense. Actual blood, sweat, horsehair, mud, leather soaked in God knows what. It all clings to your nostrils, thick and metallic, and that's just your side. Then someone headbutts you. You don't know who. You don't know why. Maybe it was intentional. Maybe it was just how close you all are. But now your nose is throbbing, and your eyes are watering, and oh great, your helmet is fogging up. You can't see. You can't think. You can barely breathe. The man in front of you suddenly lurches sideways, and now there's space. Not a lot, but just enough to see the whites of someone else's eyes before he swings at your head. You duck. Too late. He catches your shield instead, and the vibration shoots down your arm like lightning. It feels like your wrist exploded. But hey, you're still alive. That's something. Not that alive feels very impressive right now. And here's the best part. You don't even know if you're winning. The entire world has collapsed into about 6 square feet of chaos. You don't know where your commander is. You don't know how far the line stretches. You don't know if the men to your right are still fighting, or if they've already run away screaming. But you do know one thing, one very clear, very immediate truth. You must not fall, because falling in this mess, that's death. Not from some noble sword fight, but from getting crushed under 30 panicked boots. It doesn't matter how strong you are, or how fast. Once you go down, you don't come back up, so your goal changes. It's not fight bravely, it's not win the day, it's just stay upright. That's it. That's your entire strategy now. Keep your footing, keep your arms moving, keep your head down. If you block something, great. If you hit something, even better. But most of all, don't stop, because hesitation is fatal. Stumbling is fatal. Pausing to look around, definitely fatal. And that, dear listener, is what it feels like when battle really starts. Not glorious, not clean, just messy, panicked, crowded hell. Now, as you lie in your soft, quiet bed, take a moment to appreciate the space around you. The air, the silence, the complete and utter lack of strangers trying to embed a rusty spike in your ribs. Because back then, this wasn't just the start of a bad day. This was survival, second by second, foot by foot. So go ahead, sink a little deeper into your pillow. Let your arms relax. No one's swinging a mace at you tonight. And if you do hear a clang, it's just your radiator. Probably. You've taken your first hit. Now breathe, and try not to dream about the second one. Let's talk weapons. You've been swinging that sword like your life depends on it, which, inconveniently, it does. But here's the thing. Your sword. It's not the legendary Excalibur. It's not some finely balanced, jewel-encrusted blade forged by monks in a mountain cave. It's a bent, mass-produced hunk of metal you inherited from your cousin, the one who didn't survive his last battle. And even that makes you lucky, because most medieval soldiers didn't use swords. Shocking, I know. Every movie, every painting, every knight in shining armor with a sword raised to the sky like he's summoning divine vengeance. Pure fantasy. The truth, swords were expensive, really expensive. The good ones were custom forged, tempered, and maintained by blacksmiths who knew what they were doing, which meant nobles, knights, or men with serious coin were the ones carrying them. Everyone else, axes, spears, sticks with nails in them. Let's start with spears, the real MVP of the medieval battlefield. Cheap, simple, deadly. You take a long stick, you put a sharp metal point on the end. Congratulations, you now own the medieval equivalent of a mass-market missile. Spears made up an estimated 70% of battlefield weapons. Why? Because they worked. You didn't need years of training. You didn't even need to be strong. You just had to jab, preferably in the general direction of someone else's vital organs. And with 6 to 8 feet of reach, you could kill someone before they even got close enough to swing back. Unless, of course, you tripped, or panicked, or stabbed your own guy by accident, which happened more than anyone liked to admit. Spears were also a bit twitchy. When you packed thousands of nervous men shoulder to shoulder, each holding a very pointy stick, accidents happened. Friendly fire wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. Half the time men were getting poked in the back by the guy behind them, who was also terrified and mostly blind thanks to his helmet. Now axes. Axes were a different story. Not elegant, not subtle, just raw, unapologetic crush. Battle axes came in all shapes. Some were single-handed, others needed two. Some were sharpened to slice, others were blunt instruments of bone-shattering persuasion. They didn't care about your armor. A good axe didn't cut. It caved in. It split shields. It snapped bones. It lodged itself into places it was never meant to be, like rib cages, or collarbones, or yes, spines. And therein lay the problem. Axes had a nasty habit of getting stuck. You'd swing with all your might, feel the satisfying thunk of impact, and then realize your weapon wasn't coming back. Not easily, not quickly, not before the guy's friend showed up with a different opinion about your survival. A stuck axe was a death sentence. While you're yanking and pulling and grunting like you're trying to harvest a turnip from hell, someone's already lining up a shot at your neck. There's a reason many soldiers carried backup weapons, daggers, maces, even rocks, because once your axe decided to become one with someone's skeleton, it wasn't yours anymore. And swords, well, yes, they had their place, but mostly for show. If you were nobility and you had the money, you might get a decent blade, one balanced, reliable, good steel. But even then, swords were notoriously fragile. Battlefield archaeology tells us many were repaired over and over, bent, dulled, snapped. They weren't lightsabers, they were tools, finicky ones. And if yours broke mid-swing, you were holding a metal stick, which frankly wasn't much better than a wooden one. Let's not forget the wild cards, farm tools, pitchforks, flails, hammers. Anything with weight and sharpness got repurposed for bloodshed. The medieval battlefield was less glorious combat and more medieval Home Depot clearance rack. So tonight, as you lie comfortably in bed, no axe lodged in your chest, no spear waiting to catch your kneecap, be grateful. Grateful you live in an era where you don't need to trust your life to the strength of a stick or the weld on a blade that's been through 3 owners and a house fire. Sleep soundly. There's no axe to pull, no spear to trip on, and no sword to disappoint you. Just you and your pillow, which, unlike most weapons back then, won't betray you. Still awake, impressive, because by now, if you were actually in this battle, you'd be a walking bruise, a broken weapon, or a slightly flattened pancake under a pile of men who panicked harder than you did. But let's keep going, shall we? Let's talk about technique, or rather, the complete lack of it. Movies love to show long, graceful sword fights, elegant footwork, clean strikes, a duel that looks more like a ballet than a murder. Yeah, no, the battlefield wasn't a stage. It was a crush of bodies, noise, sweat, panic, confusion. You had barely enough space to breathe, let alone pull off a dramatic parry. That's where the murder stroke comes in. Doesn't that sound charming? It's not some poetic flourish. It's literally called that, the murder stroke. You take your sword, reverse it in your hands, and use the pommel, the blunt metal knob at the end, to bash someone's skull in, like you're knocking on a door you really want opened. Historically accurate, brutally effective, and a perfect metaphor for how ugly medieval fighting actually was, because most of the time, you couldn't even swing your sword the right way. Too crowded, too close, too many elbows in your ribs and knees in your back. You weren't fighting like a knight, you were fighting like a rat in a barrel, panicked, flailing, and absolutely done with everything around you. Which brings us to friendly fire. Yes, even in the Middle Ages, before gunpowder, before smoke grenades, before radios could scramble a command, men still managed to kill their own side, constantly, in the chaos. You couldn't see much, you could barely hear, helmets muffled sound, armor blocked your vision, you had a thin slit to peek through, and if someone smeared mud or blood across it, and they did, you were basically swinging at shapes and praying. One of them was your enemy. You probably hit 3 of your own men before you landed a clean shot on anyone else. And you know what? No one blamed you, because they were doing the same thing. There were no bright uniforms, no glowing team colors, just tired, dirty, terrified men in brown, grey or blood-soaked beige, all wielding sharp objects, and all screaming incoherently. You might recognize a comrade's helmet, or you might not. You might hear someone yell your name, or you might assume it was your death whisper. It didn't matter, because by the time you could stop to look, someone else had already swung. Feet. Let's talk about feet. Someone's foot was always in your ribs, or under yours, or next to your face, because men fell, constantly, not because they were weak, although yes, they were, but because the ground was every flavor of awful. Mud, blood, loose limbs, spilled guts. It was like fighting on a butcher's floor during a flood. So yes, someone's boot was probably grinding into your side right now, whether you were standing or not. If you went down, they stepped on you. If they went down, you stepped on them. That's how it worked. There was no dignity, no honor, just slipping, shoving, swinging, and shouting. And through all of it, you were just trying to stay alive. You weren't focused on style. You weren't thinking about victory. You were thinking, where's my weapon? Is that my blood? Whose rib did I just crack? Am I still facing the right way? If you're still listening to this, tucked in bed with your cozy blanket, pillow fluffed just right, and no one's foot in your rib cage, savor it. Because on a medieval battlefield, rest wasn't just rare, it was a death sentence. Pause too long, and you were dead. Get disoriented, and you were dead. Swing the wrong way, and your best friend was dead, and then you were next. So breathe deep, feel the softness of your mattress, enjoy the stillness, the quiet. No murder strokes required tonight, just sleep. And if you do roll over and accidentally elbow someone in the face, well, at least it's not with a pommel. Ah, yes, death. The thing you were trying so hard to avoid this entire time. You suited up in your hand-me-down armor. You shuffled into the fight. You screamed, cried, swung wildly, accidentally elbowed someone you liked. And now, You're about to discover how most medieval soldiers actually died. Spoiler alert, it wasn't glorious. There were no epic duels, no final words whispered over a heroic wound, no slow fade into history as the choir swelled. Most of the time, you just fell down and got trampled. That's it. That's the end of your story. Because once you were on the ground, you were no longer a soldier. You were an obstacle, a soft one. And the battlefield didn't stop for you. It ran you over. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of boots, hooves, and armored legs stomped right across your ribs, face, and spine, like you were a particularly unlucky patch of grass. You didn't die fighting. You died because someone's heel caved in your chest while they were trying to flee. Then there was suffocation. Yes, in full daylight, in open air. Because when you're buried under 4 men and a horse, sucking in oxygen becomes rather difficult. Soldiers suffocated in the mud, under bodies, under their own collapsed formations. Your helmet didn't help. Oh no, it made it worse. That metal pot on your head, it trapped heat, it trapped moisture. It turned your skull into a personal sauna, a medieval crock pot for your brain. If the enemy didn't kill you, heat exhaustion might. Some soldiers collapsed mid-battle, not from wounds, but from sheer overheating. They baked inside their armor, and there was nothing noble about it. You want drama? Fine, let's talk about faces. Because if you were hit in the face and you were going to be hit in the face, it wasn't going to be a clean Hollywood cut. It was going to be a mace, a flanged hammer, a spiked club. And faces don't like those. Helmets helped, sometimes, but if someone swung hard enough, the metal crumpled like a soup can. It didn't protect you. It joined the weapon, pressed into your face, flattened your nose, crushed your jaw, or just plain removed the part of your skull where your good ideas used to live. And if you survived the hit, well, then you got to enjoy the long, slow game of medieval blood loss. Because it turns out that being stabbed or clubbed in the body is bad for your health. Shocking, I know. You bleed fast, you bleed internally, and no one's coming to help you. There were no medics, no field hospitals. If you were lucky, a fellow soldier might drag you out of the way so he didn't trip over you. If you were very lucky, someone might tie a rag around the wound, but most just bled out in the dirt. And for the survivors, let's talk infection. That wound you took to the thigh. Yeah, it's turning black. That slash across your shoulder, the one with the rust from the enemy's blade. Say hello to fever, pus, and delirium. There were no antibiotics. No sterile tools, just whatever knife someone had in their belt and whatever moss they thought was medicinal. A cut could kill you, so could a scrape or a rat bite, or just existing in armor that hadn't been cleaned in 3 years and still had the dried blood of your predecessor caked inside. And the worst part, you didn't always die right away. You might crawl off the field, lie there groaning in the mud. Someone might almost help you, and then realize you were too far gone and walk away, which honestly is the most medieval ending possible. So if you're still awake, first of all, impressive. Take a deep breath, feel your chest rise without caving in, wiggle your toes and know there's no one stepping on them. Touch your face and be grateful it's still face-shaped. You're not baking in a helmet, you're not bleeding from the thigh, you're not slowly dying of an infection that smells like cheese and regret. You're safe, warm, and wonderfully alive. Let that comfort you. Let it wash over you like a warm blanket of not being stomped to death. Close your eyes, sleep, and try not to dream about maces. By now you've stopped thinking. Not in a poetic sense. Not some lost in the moment nonsense. No, your brain has genuinely decided we're done here. Too much noise. Too many smells, too many things trying to kill you at once, so it shuts off. Not completely, of course. You're still breathing, you're still moving. But the higher functions, the parts that usually ask things like, should I do this? Or where am I? Those have packed their bags and left the building. What's left is something simpler, primal, automatic, a stripped-down version of you that swings when it sees motion and flinches when something sharp comes too close. You're not fighting, you're reacting. Your vision, tunneled. Everything outside a small, blurry rectangle has disappeared. It's just shapes now, shadowy, armored shapes lunging, ducking, bleeding, screaming. Friend, foe, who knows, who cares? You just swing. You don't hear individual sounds anymore. It's all one long roar, like a waterfall made of metal and pain. Sometimes you feel a jolt, maybe a hit, maybe just your shoulder slamming into someone else. Sometimes you scream. You don't remember deciding to. It just happens. This is what historians politely call battle mind. Your senses narrow, your thoughts dim. Your body does whatever it takes to not die. You forget your name. You forget where you are. You forget why you're even here. Your legs move without permission. Your arms jerk in a rhythm you didn't choreograph. Your sword hand is clenched so tight, your knuckles have gone white, or maybe they're bleeding. You don't know. You don't care. You swing. You block. You step. You duck. Over and over. Like a puppet running out of string. You might trip. You might fall. You might even go down entirely, crushed into the muck, gasping for breath as someone's boot lands inches from your face. But then, somehow, you're back up. You don't remember how. You don't remember when. The battle keeps going, and so do you. Until finally, it stops. Not with a trumpet, not with a cheer, just silence, or something like it. The kind of silence that still buzzes, that hums in your bones, that vibrates in your ears because they've been ringing for so long, they don't know what to do without the screaming. And you wake up, not in a bed, not in a tent. You wake up under a corpse. It's heavy. It smells awful. Its face is pressed against yours, or what's left of its face. You blink. You try to move. Your body says, please don't. Every limb is sore. Every joint feels like it's been hammered. Your mouth tastes like rust. Your armor is sticky, damp, and oddly warm in places that shouldn't be warm. You try to speak, and what comes out is a croak, not a word, just proof that your lungs are still participating. You look around, slowly, carefully, bodies, everywhere. Some are still, some are twitching, some are making sounds that are either moans or prayers. There's a sword near your hand. You don't remember dropping it. You don't remember picking it up in the first place. You sit up, or try to. Your back protests. Your ribs protest louder. But eventually, you manage, and you realize something horrible. You survived. You don't know how. There's no logic to it. You weren't the fastest, or the strongest, or the best trained. You were just lucky. The man next to you, the one whose face is missing, he wasn't. And now, what? You get up, you limp away. You try to find someone, anyone, who can tell you what happened. Sometimes the commanders are still alive. Sometimes they're already gone. No one checks for survivors. No one counts the living. You're just one more muddy, blood-soaked silhouette stumbling away from a massacre. And yet, you keep walking. Because your brain, the one that shut down an hour ago, it's still trying to catch up. You'll remember pieces, later, in flashes, in dreams, in the way your hand flinches when someone claps behind you. But for now, it's all a haze. You're numb, you're moving, you're not dead. Which, by medieval standards, is a remarkable outcome. Now, listener, wherever you are, in whatever peaceful century you call home, take a deep breath. Let it fill your lungs. Let your arms go slack. Let your brain finally shut off, safely, warmly, in the comfort of your bed. You're not in battle. You're not under a corpse. And tomorrow, you won't wake up wondering why you're still breathing. So let the weight of it go. The armor, the terror, the noise, let it slide away. Close your eyes. Rest your limbs. Forget your name for a little while. Because in this quiet moment, you survived too. So you're still alive, somehow. And now comes the next critical decision in your illustrious medieval military career. Do you run? Do you beg? Or do you drop to the ground and hope no one notices your breathing? Because let's be honest, at this point in the battle, there's no such thing as strategy. It's survival. And the sooner you accept that, the longer you'll live. Most soldiers didn't die bravely. Most soldiers ran, and the smart ones ran early. They didn't wait for the signal. They didn't wait for their lord to fall, or for some magical turning of the tide. No, the moment they saw the guy next to them get cleaved like a roast chicken, they started edging backward, casually at first, like they were just checking on something in the rear line, and then full sprint, armor be damned. And here's the truth, the songs never tell you. Running worked. More often than not, those who broke and fled were the ones who made it home. Missing a sword maybe, a few fingers, some pride, but alive. And while poets wept into their quills about cowards abandoning their brothers in arms, guess who got to drink warm ale at the tavern that night? Not the brave ones. They were busy decomposing in a ditch. There's a saying from the time, the graveyard is full of heroes. The tavern is full of cowards. Etch that into your helmet if you have to. Now, if running wasn't an option, say you were surrounded or your legs had very recently stopped cooperating, you had two other choices, surrender or play dead. Let's start with surrender. Contrary to popular belief, surrendering did happen in medieval battles, but it was a gamble, a big one. You had to make it clear that you weren't a threat, no weapon, hands up, head down, while hoping the enemy one, noticed, and two, cared. Sometimes, if they thought you were valuable, a noble, a skilled archer, someone wearing boots that still had soles, they'd spare you, take you prisoner, maybe ransom you back, maybe force you into service. But if you were just a regular foot soldier with bad teeth and a borrowed sword, well, the guy swinging the axe might not be in the mood for nuance, especially after hours of carnage, heat, and panic. People got tired. Tired people make snap decisions, and your please don't kill me might sound an awful lot like I'm still dangerous. So surrender was tricky. That brings us to the final and surprisingly effective option, playing dead. Yes, really. Fall down, hold still, hope for the best. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't noble, but it worked. You weren't the only body on the field, far from it. The ground was littered with the dead, the dying, and the convincingly motionless. You just had to blend in. Some men lay in ditches, some rolled under carts, some buried themselves in loose hay, or mud, or whatever filth they could grab. And then there's the legend, possibly true, probably exaggerated, of a soldier who climbed inside a dead horse to survive. You heard that right. The story goes that surrounded by the enemy, with nowhere to run and no hope of mercy, he cut open a fallen horse and crawled inside, stayed there, for hours, covered in blood, bile and whatever else was fermenting in the poor beast's stomach. When the field finally quieted and the enemy moved on, he emerged, shaking, stinking, and very much alive. Was it disgusting? Yes. Would you do it too? In a heartbeat. Because that's the difference between life and death on a medieval battlefield. It's not strength. It's not bravery. It's adaptability. Knowing when to swing and when to lie down and become part of the scenery. And those who survived, they didn't brag. They didn't tell glorious tales. They mostly didn't talk about it at all. Because who wants to admit they faked their own death under a pile of intestines, while the rest of their comrades got turned into stew? But you know what? They got to go home, to their families, to their villages, to warm food and dry clothes and beds that didn't reek of blood and burning. So tonight, as you lie there, actually allowed to lie there, without a sword to your throat or a hoofprint on your chest, take comfort in that. You don't need to be a hero. You don't need to win a battle. You just need to not die. Pull your blanket closer. Sink into your mattress like a clever little soldier hiding under a corpse. There's no shame in rest, no shame in surrender, and absolutely no shame in pretending to be asleep until the danger passes. In fact, you're doing it right now. Well done. Now don't move. Stay still, stay quiet, and drift, because faking sleep might just be the most historically accurate survival tactic you've heard all night. So, the battle's over. Apparently, you won, which, in medieval terms, just means you're not dead, at least not yet. You're standing. Maybe. You're breathing. You're not bleeding from anywhere new. That's about as close to victory as you're going to get. There's no cheering, no flags being raised, no heroic speeches or sudden sunrise behind a silhouette of noble warriors, just silence. Thick, strange silence. The kind that hums in your ears because they've been full of screaming for so long, they forgot how to hear anything else. Around you, men slump to the ground, not in celebration, but because their legs finally gave out. Some are crying, some are praying, most are just staring, blank-faced, mouth slightly open, like they're waiting for someone to explain what just happened. And you're checking for limbs, yours first. Can you move your arms? Good. Your fingers? Still attached. Your legs? One of them hurts, but it's there. That's enough. Next, you check your friends. If they're nearby, if they're still breathing, if you can even recognize them under the mud, blood and broken armor. Some you won't find, some you'll wish you hadn't. Then comes the part no one sings about. The looting. Yes, it happened. Constantly. Because armor was expensive, weapons were rare, boots were boots, and if you saw a man lying there, very clearly not using his chainmail anymore, you took it. You took his knife, his pouch, his helmet. You took the coin sewn into the seam of his tunic. You took the shoes right off his feet, assuming he still had feet. If he didn't, well, easier actually. You didn't think twice. You couldn't afford to, because maybe that sword would feed your family. Maybe that extra cloak would save you from freezing tonight. Maybe you'd be dead in a week, and you wanted something nice to die in. Sometimes, the line between the living and the dead blurred. You'd reach down for a belt buckle, and the corpse would groan. Too bad. You moved on. Because mercy wasn't part of the post-battle routine. You took what you could carry, and kept walking. And if you were really lucky, if no one was watching, you found something strong to drink. Ale, mead, something vaguely alcoholic and questionably safe. You didn't care, because drinking wasn't about thirst. It was about forgetting. Forgetting the screams, the faces, the awful moment when your blade slid through something soft and warm and human. Forgetting the look in your friend's eyes when they realized their stomach was open and they wouldn't be making it back for dinner. Forgetting the smell, that horrific stew of iron and bile and filth that had seeped into your nose and now refused to leave. So yes, you drank, fast, hard, until the world blurred and the ache dulled and the blood dried into something you could ignore for a few hours. And all the while, you were still trying to figure out what victory even meant, because the field didn't look like a victory. It looked like a butcher's market after a thunderstorm. Piles of bodies, weapons stuck in things, crows already circling. There were no parades, no garlands, just you, your shaking hands, and the realization that you'd never be clean again. Not truly, not inside. So you sat, in silence, wiping blood off your knuckles with someone else's shirt, pulling off your boots to check if all your toes still answered roll call. And somewhere, someone was already planning the next battle. But not you, not now, because right now, your only goal is to not think too hard, to not picture the faces, to not replay the moment when you slipped in something that used to be a man. Tonight, you lie on the ground, no tent, no fire, just dirt. And if you're lucky, if the wind doesn't pick up and the wolves stay away, you might actually sleep. Which brings us to you, modern listener, lying in bed, warm, clean, and gloriously unstabbed. Take a moment, feel the softness beneath you, the quiet around you, the peace you didn't have to earn by walking through hell. You didn't swing a blade today, You didn't loot a corpse. You didn't crawl away from a battlefield with half your hearing and none of your dignity. You just existed, and sometimes that's victory enough. So breathe, settle, let your limbs grow heavy and your thoughts float away. You've made it to the end of the battle, and unlike most, you get to close your eyes safely. Victory isn't a song, it's a heartbeat, it's breath, it's stillness. Let that stillness hold you now, and sleep, because no one's coming for your boots tonight. You survived the battle. Congratulations. Your reward? A lifetime of nightmares, phantom pain, and the creeping suspicion that a part of you never made it off that field. Because while the sword wounds might scab over and the bruises might fade, the other wounds, the ones no one talks about, those never quite close. Let's start with the basics. There were no field hospitals, no white walls, no antiseptics, no soft-spoken nurses giving you morphine and a clipboard. What you had was a tent, if you were lucky, damp, cold, buzzing with flies and prayers, filled with moaning men laid out like discarded laundry. No beds, just straw soaked in blood, sweat, and everything that leaks out of a body when it's been cracked open. At the center of the chaos, a man with a knife, not a doctor, not really, just the best guess your army had. Maybe he was a barber, maybe a blacksmith, maybe a priest who once saw someone stitch up a cow. He had a few tools, none of them clean, a saw for when limbs had to go, a needle for stitching what could still be stitched, and a belt, not for medical use mind you, that was for you to bite while you screamed. No anesthesia, no antiseptic, just pain, pure ancient pain. The kind that hits the back of your teeth and spreads to your soul. You didn't heal, you endured, and when your wounds did close, if they closed, the real damage was only just beginning. Because the battlefield doesn't stay out there, it comes home with you. It settles in your bones. It follows you into the quiet, especially the quiet. You wake in the night, heart racing, lungs clawing for air, certain you heard screaming, only to realize it was you. Your spouse jolts awake, elbowed in the ribs for the third time this week. They ask if you're all right. You lie. You say it was a dream. You say you're fine, but you're not, because every time you close your eyes, you see that man's face, or what was left of it, the moment your blade went in, too fast, too messy, and stayed there. You smell the blood. You feel the ground shifting beneath you, bodies rolling, boots crunching. You hear the crack of bone, the gurgle of the dying. Even years later, even in peace, even in a warm bed, far from the mud and fire and metal. Some nights you don't sleep at all. You stare at the ceiling, or the thatch roof, or the stars, counting breaths, trying not to remember the way his eyes went still. And if you do sleep, you wake up clawing at something that isn't there, begging forgiveness in a language only your ghosts understand. They didn't have a name for it then. No diagnosis, no therapy, no pamphlet. You weren't traumatized. You were haunted. You were moody. You were not the same since the war. And the village just learned to work around it. They stopped asking why you didn't come to the feast. They knew better than to approach you from behind. They watched your hands twitch during thunderstorms, and they said nothing, because they'd seen it before, and they knew they'd see it again. Soldiers returned, if they returned at all, changed. Some went quiet, some drank, some left entirely, vanished into the woods, took up a hermit's life, built a shack, talked to no one, because it was easier than explaining what it felt like to press a dagger into someone's gut and feel their body seize around your wrist. Easier than reliving the moment you didn't run fast enough, didn't block high enough, didn't save him. You didn't forget. You couldn't. The war had carved itself into you, not with blades, not just with blades, but with moments, with guilt, with silence that never felt empty again. And so you lived, not healed, not whole, just lived. Each day you put one foot in front of the other, tended your fields, mended your roof, kissed your children, and when someone said, "Tell me about the war," you looked down and said no. Now, you in your bed, in your century far removed, maybe you understand it a little better, that weight, that silence. Tonight, your wounds are imagined, your battlefield is padded, your ghosts are histories, but that doesn't mean they didn't bleed like you would, or suffer like you do, or lie awake like you are now. So take a long breath, in, out, feel your pulse slow, let your limbs go heavy, and let the darkness comfort you, not haunt you. You're not in a tent, you're not beside a moaning line of men, you're not about to be sawn in half by a man with shaking hands and a prayer. You're here, safe, soft, whole. The battle's over, the wound is closed, and now you can sleep. The swords are down, the screams are gone, and all that's left is the field, still, empty, covered in the aftermath, the armor, the torn banners, the broken bodies. But give it time, the grass will return. It always does. Season by season, the rain will fall, the soil will shift, and the earth will reclaim what war tried to keep. Blades will rust, bones will sink, the battlefield will vanish, as if it was never there at all. But not for the men who stood on it, because the real fight didn't end when the trumpets fell silent. It began in the stillness, in the memories, in the long nights when you couldn't explain why loud noises made your hands shake, or why you flinched at the smell of smoke, or why your sleep came in shallow, haunted fragments. The truth is, for the medieval soldier, glory was a myth. What came after the battle wasn't a hero's welcome. It was loss, scars, silence, and yet they endured. They went home, they rebuilt, they kept going, just like you will, in whatever small battles you're quietly surviving. So rest now, brave non-combatant of the modern world. You've traveled far tonight, through mud, blood, steel, and sorrow. Let it all fade. Let the field grow quiet. Let the wind roll in, soft and green, until nothing remains but peace. This has been the Grumpy Historian. Sleep well, and may your only battlefield be in your dreams.